All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update. I am your host, Christopher Lind, and if I am doing my job well, hopefully I am keeping you 10 steps ahead of whatever is happening at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I've got a full rundown this week, but before I get into it, first of all, as a reminder, I would encourage you, if you enjoy this kind of content, please like, subscribe, share it with someone, give it a rating, review, all that good stuff. And I love hearing from all of you. So if you send me notes of things you want me to cover, actually, one of the topics I'm covering today is because somebody sent me something. So I'll include that. But I just enjoy hearing from folks. My goal is to continually tweak things. Oh, yeah. Another update that I'll explain later, also came from the community. So thanks to all of you who are reaching out, staying in touch. And yeah, my goal is to make this as valuable for you as possible. And if you find enough value in it that you would go, you know what, Christopher, if I actually ever met you, I would take you to lunch or I would take you out for a coffee. Be sure to check out my Buy Me a Coffee link and say thanks. It's just a small way you can help encourage me and also help this content keep coming. So with that, thank you so much. And so let's get into the rundown of what I'm talking about this week. So I've got a quick update on some things that was all over related to ChatGPT and conversations being all over Google and all this other stuff. I want to set the record straight on what this is because I know there's information travels at different speeds and people may be thinking different things. And I just want to explain how it happened and what it means, and also how to be careful with how you respond to it. There's been an interesting development in the Workday case that I want to talk about that hopefully will make people be a little more thoughtful about how they're using AI. I have a personal story, or not a personal, somebody I know, again, the community. I told you two things are related to the community. Somebody reached out with a story about the impact of AI decision-making that's having real impact on a person's life. And while it came to resolution, it's a story I want to unpack. And then I did say last time, I know a lot of the things I talk about are heavy, and I want to try and do more to try and incorporate, hey, but here's a bright spot, because sometimes it can just feel like, so is there any way to do things well? And I have countless examples where I'm doing things that are going well. And so I want to start sharing more stories around where we've seen wins with AI, where I personally have been involved with wins, because it is possible to use it for good and to actually get better outcomes for the business and for all the people involved. So with that, let's get started. So the first one I want to talk about is, if you have not seen headlines related to it, last week, I think it was about 4 or 5 days ago, there was a huge kerfuffle out there because people's private, and I use air quotes loosely with this, private conversations with ChatGPT had been indexed and were now showing up in public search results. And of course, I actually saw it because people in my social circles were like, hey, there's this great opportunity for you to learn more about how people are interacting with ChatGPT and see what they're talking about and see what questions they're asking. And I immediately looked at it and went, I don't think this is intentional. But I knew people were going to freak out. And so sure enough, then there was this whole bunch of noise all over that. And the way it was represented, so I want to set the record straight of what happened here in case you've heard this and you're freaking out. It was represented that ChatGPT is making everybody's conversations public and they're being indexed by Google. Okay, that's how a lot of the headlines were being framed, which naturally had people freaking out. And there's screenshots of like people's conversations and search results and all this other stuff. So of course, everybody's panicking, and rightfully so. If that actually was what's happening, I would agree that would be a huge vulnerability in the system that would need to be closed very quickly, which, heads up, it was closed. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the screenshots everywhere, you can see all this stuff. You can imagine people suddenly went, oh my goodness, every conversation I've ever had with ChatGPT is now public knowledge. So there's a mad scramble as people are running all over, all sorts of stuff. Let me explain what really was going on first so that right? So that you don't misunderstand, because it was not actually OpenAI openly sharing everybody's private conversations. Okay. That actually never was the case. So don't get in your head that OpenAI was, taking your private conversations and making them publicly accessible, and there was this huge vulnerability in there. You had the option with conversations to share them. It was a relatively recent feature that OpenAI had added so that you could collaborate on a conversation with somebody else. You could invite them into the conversation. They could participate in it. It was for collaboration purposes. And within that, you had the option to make it publicly indexable. Now, I understand people going, why on earth would you ever want one of your conversations publicly indexable? Personally, the number of use cases I can think of where that would actually be valuable is so narrow that I'm like, you were just asking for trouble with this. Okay. Can I think of some use cases? Yes. Can I see something where you would be fine? You'd maybe want a group of people to be able to, collaborate, and maybe whatever you came up with, you wanted to share with the world or something like that. I mean, I suppose I'm sure this is one of those, and I've been in rooms with developers before where it's like, hey, shouldn't we do this? Because somebody might want it. And again, if you're not thinking through the long-term implications and taking into account most people's technical acumen, it sounds good on paper. But in reality, I really struggle to find some real practical use cases for it. But nonetheless, you could share a conversation. There was a little tick box that said, make it publicly indexable. And as you can imagine, there are lots of people who are moving fast, not paying attention. If I remember correctly, it's already been sealed, so I can't go back and look at it. But if I remember correctly, it was not checked by default. So you actually had to physically check it. Okay. But again, many people they're in a hurry. They don't understand the implications of what they're doing. They're just moving quick. And so lots of people just shared and checked the box. And so their stuff was out there, and Google is really good at finding things, and it found it and, put it all over search results. So that's what happened. Okay. OpenAI was not taking everybody's information and against their will sharing it publicly. That was never the case. That's not what they were doing. So if that's what you heard, that is not accurate information. I want to set the record straight on that. And it was truly, I think, many people just moving fast, not understanding the implications of what they're doing and checking a box when they shared things. All right. So that's what really happened. Now, because of the backlash, they've just straight up rolled it back, and they're working with Google to get everything taken down and all this other stuff. So, if you were thinking, oh, I really use that feature, well, it's gone now, which, if you have a good use case for it, I'd love to hear it. I truly had to sit and think about it and go, when would this be wise? And it really was a stretch. But if you've got one, hey, I'm open to hearing it. But it's closed now, so you can't do it even if you wanted to. So there you go. We we closed the gap. All right. But I do think it illustrates a lesson that everyone should be aware of, which is I am going to continue to repeat and encourage people, do not share things with any AI app or any app. I mean, anything that you wouldn't potentially want showing up somewhere. Okay. Now, my real recommendation is don't do things you wouldn't want people finding out about. That's just a best practice to have, is just don't do stuff. But that's not me saying privacy and discernment and security are silly. Just live life in such a way, and then who cares? I don't like that attitude. So don't interpret my view on this as everybody should just not care. I absolutely am someone who is a big advocate for privacy and discernment. However, as a best practice, do not share things with AI. And this is a perfect example. All it takes is you moving too quick, not paying attention, and before you know it, something, ends up somewhere in someone's hands that you didn't want to, and information about you is shared. Now, last week, I shared about the rising legal risk of people's conversations being subpoenaed. Now, that's a different one, because that's not an option you can turn on and off. If it gets subpoenaed, you're just cooked. This one was, but it's another reason to say, hey, like, be really careful what you're doing. Slow down. If you don't understand something, if you see something that says make indexable and you're like, I'm not really sure what that is, stop, look it up, like check, do a little research into like, what might this do before you do it. I get we're moving fast, but this is another one of the reasons why moving fast is not always a good thing. And right now there's so much pressure to move so quickly that it's causing major problems. So be wise with how you're using it. Slow down and look into some of this stuff. And then even just to slow down, when you hear things like this, take a breath. Okay. The amount of misinformation about this huge security flaw in OpenAI, well, I think the feature was dumb and reckless. OpenAI did not deserve the heat they got for it. They really didn't. It was a functionality. It was a feature that was available. People foolishly, and again, we don't want to take responsibility when we mess up. We want to blame the tool, which I'll talk about next. This was user error. This was user error. That's really what this was. Risky feature, yes, but ultimately it was user error. And so if you're seeing some of this stuff, or if you hear somebody say, do you know that whatever you put in ChatGPT will show up on Google? Please correct somebody. Say, you know what, I heard that too, but I actually learned later, and you know, well, you want to mention this or however else you found out, and just say, actually, that's not the case. What actually happened was there was a feature, people weren't paying attention and they accidentally shared information. So best practice, don't share things with AI you wouldn't want potentially being there, and slow down and actually pay attention to what you're checking before you just move on with your day. But that one kind of blew up. Clarity came. They closed the gap. Now it's not even an option. So even if you were thinking to yourself, boy, I really would like to use that, or some of the companies that were really excited about it were excited about the fact that they could now go harvest people's data and see how they use AI, which, you know, go figure that's what some organizations would be really excited about. But needless to say, it's in the past, but I don't think this will be the last time we hear about something like this happening. So be conscious, be aware of what you're doing out there. All right, next up, I mentioned, speaking of be careful how reliant you become on AI, Workday, a latest development in the Workday case. If you weren't aware, they've been, in court battling some legal battles because they have what's called, what is it called? They've got a thing in work. If you don't know what Workday is, it's a HR system. It's basically what, I don't know what percentage, a large majority of companies use for all of their, candidate tracking, all your employee data. If you go in and do your benefits and look up HR policies and stuff, there's a good chance if you're at a company, you're going into Workday when you do it. Anyway, they had implemented a functionality called the hired score. It was like this functionality in Workday they added to recruiting that allowed you to assign a match of someone to jobs. And so, great, right? Sounds wonderful. Let AI from Workday tell us whether these people are going to be a good match for these jobs. Well, yeah, there are laws in place that prevent discrimination and require companies to be ethical in their hiring practices. And there were some questions about whether the way the AI was trained and the way it was being used was actually in compliance with these laws. So Workday, as the provider of this technology, found themselves in court. Well, that has continued. And needless to say, the findings are that, yeah, it's not objective and it's highly biased, which I won't say this, but I think that may still be coming as a surprise to people that, wait, what? This AI is actually not hiring people based on their qualifications and other things. It's discriminating based on attributes that are illegal to discriminate against. Surprise, surprise, that AI might do something like that. So anyway, Workday's in some hot water. Well, it recently got a little bit bigger in that now the court's ordering, they want a full list of every employer who has ever enabled and used the higher score by AI. So this is a pretty interesting development. And when I mentioned this whole case kind of going, hitting in the news feed recently, I said I wanted to follow this because, first of all, one, this is very much going to determine, this isn't going to be the only thing, but I have a fair amount of legal friends, and we talk about the fact there's not a lot of legal precedent right now of when AI does something, who's really at fault? Who gets held accountable for it? Is it the AI? Is it the AI company? Is it the developers that made it? Is it the company that chose to use? Like, who does the axe fall on? And there's not a lot of answers to that at this point. So cases like this matter a lot because where it goes will then be used as reference points by judges making determinations, by juries, that evaluate how they feel about it, by lawyers and legal teams in terms of what they can and can't press, all this stuff. So the fact that not only is Workday finding themselves behind the gun and under the axe for what their hired score was doing and how it worked, now the judge is saying, we want to know all the companies that also use this, which it's still early. So what they're going to do with that, it's hard to say. But the reason I wanted to bring attention to this, and I wrote about it earlier this week on LinkedIn, is the fact that one of the biggest dangers right now as it relates to AI is we're still in this early stage where many people don't think about the implications of it, or it feels like it's creating something from nothing. I wrote a post earlier this week about the fact that we like to think it's like creating productivity. It's making things from nothing, and it's not. It's transferring it. It's repurposing it. It's moving things around, but nothing is actually being created. And so the same thing is true when it comes to accountability. AI is not magically making accountability for bad things go away. It's not becoming the sacrificial lamb or scapegoat for accountability. And the courts are upholding that, which was my hope. Because, boy, I'll tell you right now, if the courts just start saying, we can just blame AI, well, AI can't do anything. So it's basically like saying nobody's responsibility. So I've been really trying to watch where this goes. And this is an interesting development, but it's really interesting in that many times this just ends up staying in the AI company field. And so what this does is it tends to build this perception that as a company, you can just pick whatever software, and if things blow up, you just kind of like let the software company take the fall. It's for them to deal. So the judge ordering the list of all the companies, this is a new precedent. I mean, I'm sure there's other examples of this, but this is a big one because where this goes is going to have major implications. And for those of you who watch or listen and are in the role of making decisions about this, I would encourage you to take this move very seriously. And if you are not taking the time to examine, hey, how are we thinking about AI? Are we making sure we're thinking through the implications? Have we documented that? Have we actually talked through different scenario planning and things like that? Have we, weighed decisions before we move forward with things? If you're just skipping those steps, you very much could find yourself under the axe. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with this, but best case scenario is like, I don't know, companies get outed for being on this list. It gets leaked, and all of a sudden all the companies that did it, and whether they actually had good practices or not, I don't even know that that's a best case scenario, but right. And then all of a sudden you're like publicly crucified for, and accused of things that maybe you didn't put a ton of weight on this higher score, but people won't care. Once they find out you're a company that used Workday's hired score AI, people are just going to fill in all the blanks with whatever. But in realistic terms, it is possible that the courts may say, okay, well, we're now going to do an investigation into the companies. We're going to order that these companies be investigated to see, did they do the due diligence, or did they just get lazy and just trust AI to pick their candidates for them? And that could cause an absolute nightmare, because if that starts happening, oh boy, the precedent that's going to set, and CIOs, CTOs, C-suite execs everywhere are going to be freaking out, because I know how much of this decision making is done just based on, the companies are the ones responsible for it. They're telling us it'll be fine. Like, let's just move forward with it. So while this is a bit unsettling for a lot of people, and if you're hearing this going, we kind of like carelessly implemented AI, you may want to go back and rethink that and re-examine it. But I think this is actually a really good thing. And the reason I think it's a really good thing is that accountability sounds terrible when you're on the receiving end of it after you've made some really stupid mistakes. Like, look, I've been on that side of it. It's not fun. Being held accountable when you messed up is not fun. So I'm not saying you should love it and enjoy it, but accountability is a really good thing because it helps everybody succeed. And so my hope is that as this continues to move forward, not only people who were bad actors and abusing AI in their hiring practices are held accountable for it, but I also hope it starts to set the precedent with people that, hey, we can't just throw caution to the wind and trust AI will take the fall, or the AI companies will take the fall if it blows up in our face. Okay. And even if, given what I talked about last week with kind of the US AI action plan seeming to move us away from accountability as it relates to AI, I still am going to advocate that don't ride that cultural wave. Because I was watching a thing with my oldest son last night about the biggest cash scam. This guy from Malaysia ran it. And what was interesting is from the beginning, I told my son, I go, you just wait. Everything he's doing is banking on this right here. And the second that changes, his whole world's going to fall apart. And sure enough, that's exactly how it played out. And so I know right now the cultural tides are moving towards, well, we're not going to worry about accountability. Well, we're not going to worry about safety. We're not going to worry about what things might actually go sideways with this. We'll figure that out later. I would plead with you not to get sucked into that current, because at some point, the tides are going to change. And if you get sucked out with that current and the tides suddenly shift, you're going to find yourself dragged to the bottom of the ocean. And nobody's going to care that the tides were moving that way at the time you were doing it. So let's say this doesn't go the way that I'm, guessing, which is, some real accountable. Let's say the US just kind of comes in and goes, it's not their fault. Like, whatever, just move on. And like, let's not worry about the laws and precedents we've set for decades to make sure hiring is fair. Is it possible that could happen? Tragically, I think yes. One of my favorite YouTubers is CoffeeZilla, and his current brand right now, his merch tagline is "Crime is legal." And in some ways, when you look around, you're like, yeah, it kind of feels like that right now. Like things that should be wrong and against the law, it's just like, well, as AI is doing it, who cares? And so, but it always catches up with you. So I am just going to plead, like, don't get sucked into those tides. And if you did get sucked into those tides a bit, you can still prevent yourself from getting sucked further out by going, hey, like, let's go back and like, let's actually reevaluate that. And you know what? We can even frame that as look, we kind of trusted it. We wanted to re-examine how it was doing. And so we did an objective analysis and we came back and we made some adjustments. That kind of stuff is going to prevent you from getting completely sucked out to sea. And so let this be a warning call, a sign to say, hey, like, chill. Like, if you are going down this path, slow down. If you need help, this is what I do. You can call me, and it might not be me. Maybe I'll pass you off to somebody else who's more relevant, or, maybe you don't like my personality. That's fine too. But my goal would be to want to connect you with somebody who can help you, because I don't want to see anybody dragged to the bottom of the ocean because they thought, hey, there's going to be no consequences for this. Because not only do you get dragged to the bottom of the ocean, good grief, as the tides go out, you drag a bunch of people to the bottom of the ocean. And then when they shift and you get sucked back in, everybody gets dragged to the bottom of the ocean. And I just don't want to see that. And this is an indicator that it's another reminder, accountability will come at some point. AI doesn't make accountability go away. It just shifts it around and maybe stalls it. So that's the latest update on Workday. Now let's move on to a story that a listener shared with me. I'll keep an anonymity for the sake of the person, but someone shared with me the story of somebody who really had a really tragic situation. They had a health condition that required a special medication, and for years they had been on this medication. They'd been getting it through things. They still were paying a lot out of pocket for what it is. They had a good job and all this other stuff. And suddenly, when they went to get it refilled, it was denied. When they went back to get their prescription, refilled, to get it all reauthorized, it said, nope, sorry. We've determined that there's no benefit to this. And this wasn't like I changed medicines. I was recently diagnosed with something and this was the direction we're going. This is something that this individual had been doing for a long time, and it had radically changed their life for the better. Like, they legitimately had significant improvements. And suddenly they found themselves going, well, what on earth am I supposed to do? The drug was already costing $25,000 out of pocket. And now it's just straight up not even covered. Like, I can't even afford it. What am I supposed to do? Like, mortgage my house? So this individual was really in a bad spot. And as he dug into it, turns out this is one of the downsides, a very serious downside to AI decision making. The company that he was getting these authorizations through had moved over to an AI decision making process that looked at the details of it and said, nope, no longer qualifies. Didn't take anything into account. And to make things even worse, as he tried to get to the bottom of it, to try and explain the situation, to trying to figure out this thing, it was all AI. AI just kept coming back to the same thing. I told you what I told you. I'm just going to reference what I said before, type of thing. And this poor individual was really going through a rough spot. Now, this whole thing blew up about a week ago. And anyway, he reached out and took the social approach. He begged on social for help and said, can someone please help? Does somebody have a connection into this organization? Does somebody know anything that's going on? And wouldn't you know it, it's not AI that changed the direction of things. It was people. Some people in positions of authority, positions of power in institutions that had some pull were actually able to get things reversed. Now, that's a happy ending, and I think that's awesome. Unfortunately, I also recognize that his story is probably not the norm. His story is the exception. This is an individual who is well connected in a very reputable role in a reputable company, has a very compelling story, all these other things. And even this individual had to fight and push and claw and do literally absolutely everything he could just to simply get a healthcare organization to say, this thing you've been doing forever that's had life-changing improvements for you, yeah, oops, mistake in the system. Sorry about that. We prompted our AI to, be a little more heavy-handed in how it analyzes things, and it definitely did not take context into its consideration and just spit out whatever it is. Now, the scary part is, or not, well, scary, whatever. The tragic part is that it didn't work when it had all the context. It had this individual's history. It had access to all these other things. And it still went, oh, my objective is to meet this new objective, and this doesn't fit. So AI doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have context. And I get in some ways people might go, that's good. It's making objective decisions. You say that until stories like this hit and you go, okay, but context does matter. There are human beings on the other end of this. We don't live in a cold, sanitized world where everything is balanced and fair and equitable and the world works well and we all support and help each other out. Like, that's not the world we live in. And so when you hand decisions over to a machine that's been trained on all of that broken, messed up data, and then give it an objective that is more surgical and cold, people are going to get really hurt. And this one really bugged me because I just went, I understand things are tough. Well, I know the organization that did this. Things are not tough for them. And this one straight up pissed me off because this is an organization that's making money hand over fist, cutting actual human employees left and right, and then pulling shenanigans like this. So quite frankly, going back to accountability, I would very much love to see this organization dragged into the court system and put through the ringer. That said, I recognize that's not always the case. And we have to be careful that cynicism doesn't get the best of us, because it's easy to look at these things and get wrapped up in, every company that uses AI is terrible and nefarious. And if something bad happens, it must mean that people were just trying to exploit the vulnerable and do all this. Like, does that happen on a tragically regular basis? It does. It does. And we need to acknowledge that as a reality, but it's not always the case. And so I do think, and actually, I think this individual did a really great job of being really respectful. Even the way he concluded it when he gave an update was like, listen, I'm not anti-AI. I'm a firm believer in this, but we need to slow down and be thinking about some of these things and make sure we have channels and pathways for what happens when there's an exception. What happens when somebody reaches out and says, hey, whoa, like this is totally messing up my life. Like, how does that not just get squelched by the AI machine? And truly, he handled it extremely well. I have tremendous respect for this individual. So if you end up hearing this, you know who you are. And I would just encourage you to keep that attitude, because that's what we need, especially in the face of this, because we're going to see a lot more of this really bad stuff happening. And the risk of that is it can start to make us jaded and skeptical and angry and all these other things. And there are some really good things that are happening. And sometimes it truly is honest mistakes. But I think it also speaks to the fact that this is why this whole idea that we can live completely autonomously, we don't need other people, we can just, me and AI are going to figure it all out. That doesn't work. And really, this example should be a testament to the fact that you do need to stay connected to people. You do need to be in community with others. If you're just heads down and going, AI gives me everything I need, like I don't need people. This is a perfect example of why, you don't think you do until you do. And then AI let him down. And who did he have to fall back on? He had to fall back on people. And I think that also should be a warning to companies who are making these big moves going, we're going all in on AI. We're just going to let AI decide what to do. And we're going to let that happen. And we aren't going to need people. Well, again, you're not going to need them until you do. And then when things fall apart, it's people who are going to be able to pull you out of the muck and the mire. And so I am extremely, again, like I said, I want to highlight some more positive examples. I got one personal story that I'll add after here, but I'm very happy to hear that it went well. I'm happy to see how this individual responded and that they didn't let it cloud their judgment. But I'm also happy to see it shined a light that what really saved this situation was communities of people caring for other people and people in the loop. It wasn't until it got into the hands of human beings that this mess got started to get fixed. And so remember that as you continue moving forward. Ideally, I would encourage you to, put some work in on the front end so you don't end up in this situation. Like, this isn't good for the company. This isn't good for their PR. This isn't good for anything. Like, this is bad in general. It's not good for AI. It's not good for, this is bad all around. So these can be avoided. And that's where I put my head on the desk sometimes when I watch this, because I'm like, you do realize we could have completely mitigated this whole thing had we done the work on the front end. So let that be a cautionary tale. But in the wake of it, it is possible to clean some of this stuff up. So there you go. I just, again, want to sometimes take it from the 100,000-foot level view and bring it down to where it's really affecting people. And not that anecdotes and outliers should be what drive decisions. That is, before I transition to the final one, that let me just make that one really clear. Because what I do want to be careful of is that stories are often very powerful in influencing what we do over data. And so, yes, this is a tragic story. If 99% of situations went fine and this was the one exception to the rule, I would probably say, hey, like, really unfortunate, but like, let's write this off as an exception. Unfortunately, this individual story is actually kind of becoming the norm. And that's the part that's concerning, is it's no longer an anecdote. It's no longer an outlier. It's becoming the status quo. And we have to do better than that, or this isn't going to be a world that any of us are going to want to live in. Okay. Let me wrap on a personal story. I got some feedback, especially to one of you, you know who you are. So I was actually going to make this whole episode stories, but then there were just too many relevant things. So I was like, well, I'll cover some things and I'll close with a story. And I may just try and do that at the end of each one. We'll see what happens. But I want to talk about an example of where AI did something really powerful and impactful for an organization that I was working with. And it's actually related to almost contrast the Workday situation, okay? Because you could look at the Workday situation and say, see, AI involved in hiring equals bad. Don't think that. And I'm going to lay out a story where AI was extremely helpful for an organization that I was working with. So essentially what this was an organization that they get a lot of candidates that apply for things. And that makes it very, very hard for them to be able to vet, to do all this stuff. But they also have lots of job openings. And what they often find is that there's great people that they only have one job. And they're like, man, like, what do we do with this? And a lot of times those people get lost in the fray. They get missed, they get overlooked, and they go on and they find other places. And that's a real problem for companies. This is actually a quantitative, tangible business problem for organizations. They lose out on great talent because they've got 100 job openings, but said person only applies to this one. And because that one went to someone else, said person just goes off into the ether. And so I was working with an organization and we said, so how can AI help with this? How can we actually use AI for the betterment of it? And guess what it included? Using AI to vet people's capabilities and skills. And you might go, didn't you just say that's what got Workday in court and all this other stuff? No. What's getting Workday and all this in court that's a problem is, and why they're demanding to see the list of companies, is the score itself. Yes, Workday may be in trouble for how it's tabulating that score. Okay, so that's a separate situation. But the reason this is expanded is that the judges are going, yeah, but how are companies using these scores? What are they doing with that information? And so knowing that, I was working with this organization and we said, listen, now, first of all, let's make sure that the score or the assessment tool we're using for people is actually like viable. It does a good job. It's actually gathering the right things. It's asking the right questions. We know what the weights and measures are. We know how it's assessing this kind of stuff. We've tested it and vetted it for bias. Okay, so some of it was that work, and we did that work. Okay, we ended up building a custom model on the inside that did a really great job of this through a very easy candidate experience. It just was a, kind of whatever assessment that they took. And it was really more just a conversation that they had. But we intentionally designed questions to be able to look for certain things and do all this stuff. And what it did was, it was less of a score. And what it did was analyze what skills these people had. And what we did was we were able to actually feed that and connect it into available job openings and have it look to see, are there other opportunities that this candidate may be a good fit for? Now, let me tell you, this was no small project, okay? There's a ton of work that went into this, but we started small with being able to do this because we at least had some data on what other job availability was out there. And so we were able to at least say, hey, when a candidate does this, it can do some high-level matching to other opportunities in the company. And what the company was able to do was they were able to, as part of the interview process, have a potential candidate, and they could have as many people as they want to do this AI assessment piece. It's quick. It was easy. It made it very, user-friendly. They were very upfront. We made sure that candidates knew what the purpose of this was and how it was a benefit to them, so that they understood, like, hey, share as much detail as you can with us, because we are looking to see, even if this opportunity doesn't work out, if there are other opportunities in the organization. Because many people that apply for jobs are actually interested in working for that company, even if it may not be that specific job. And so we were informing the candidate. We made sure the AI that was in place we understood and had documented these things. So if anybody ever said, hey, how did you decide to do that? We could actually speak to it. We actually had clear plans for what were we doing with that information and how would we track the effectiveness of it. By the way, this did not take years. So if you're hearing this and going, yeah, but that's years of work. Actually, no, it's not. But then what it did was people would do this, and the company was thrilled with this, because what was happening is these volumes of candidates, they were very quickly and easily able to have their talent acquisition teams go, I talked to this person and I think this other person's a better fit, but as part of this assessment, these 3 other opportunities actually might be a fit. Now, in the early stages, we did not have enough connected to it for it to automate a lot of this work. But what it did was the talent acquisition person was actually able to proactively reach out to the other candidate that wasn't going to move forward and say, hey, unfortunately, this role is not going to work. However, these other opportunities, based on that assessment tool that we connected you with, it actually identified you may actually be a good fit for some of these other things. And it now generated that report on why. Because one of the other big gaps, just to help, and I'll show you kind of the thinking behind this as I was architecting this, is one of the big gaps is hiring managers sometimes have a very, believe it or not, they have a very narrow way of thinking about who they're hiring. And it's hard for them to connect the dots between adjacent skills or adjacent roles or things like that. And so part of this tool was to be able to articulate how this person's skills and capabilities mapped to these adjacent jobs, so that when the talent acquisition person who may not fully understand the job, was able to see it, but also the hiring manager was able to see the logic behind, wait, why am I talking to this person when I'm looking for people with this experience? Oh, okay, this report is saying this person has worked on all these kinds of projects, has these kinds of interests, has these kinds of capabilities. Oh, now I'm seeing why they may be a potentially great fit for this opportunity. And the data coming back was this was a better candidate experience. People really enjoyed feeling like, wow, this is a company invested in me. They're not only interviewing me for a job, they're seeing if there's an opportunity for me to participate in what the organization is doing. That's great as a candidate. On top of it, there was real meaningful dialogue and feedback with the candidate. Hey, maybe not this, but here's some other things. It empowered the candidate to go, no, I don't want, they didn't automate, oh, we've automatically applied you to these other jobs. No, they put it in the candidate's hands. So it didn't add more work to the company to go, well, geez, now we got to match all these other people, vet this other stuff. No, we designed it to be empowering to the candidate to go, are you interested in being with the organization or this specific role? If it's the organization, here's some other possibilities type of a thing. That was fantastic for the candidate. It took a ton of work off the talent acquisition team, because now instead of trying to figure all this out, every TA person I've ever known has wanted to say, I love this person, but I don't know where else I might be able to fit them. And they don't have time to try and figure this all out. Well, AI did that work for them. Now, it wasn't just a blind AI said so we did. No, but what it did was it gave that talent acquisition person an opportunity to go, hey, I've got some other things. I thought you were great. Here's some other things you might want to consider. And it connected the dots while also informing the talent acquisition person, the candidate, and the hiring manager, why might this maybe unorthodox or adjacent candidate be a great fit? And like I said, still early, there's still a ton of room for what we can do to optimize, to speed this up, to make it even more robust. And both human-centric and performance-driven. This was just scratching the surface, but the gains we saw from this were through the moon. Okay. And so this, and I'm really glad I asked about it last week. I'm glad. Thank you for those of you who sent the feedback, because I do want to share more of these stories, because I recognize that it can feel daunting and overwhelming and really negative when you think about how bad it all is, and oh, this person doesn't get their drugs approved, and this person's getting laid off for AI, and this person got dragged into court because they misused AI. And when you hear all that, it can be like, there's just no way to do it right. And there is. There are ways that this can make things better for everyone. And that's the thing that I'm trying to drive home is it's not a zero-sum game. Because you make it better for a candidate doesn't mean talent acquisition has to lose, doesn't mean the hiring. We can all win with this. And that doesn't mean spending years planning and millions of dollars orchestrating. You can do this quickly, efficiently, and effectively if you're willing to put the time and effort and attention onto it. And if you don't have that, that's exactly why I do the work I do, to help people see these things. And that's exactly what I was brought in to do with them. Was they're like, here's the challenges. I don't know, is there a way we can do this that doesn't end up us up in court? Yes, there is. So I hope stories like that are an encouragement. Please let me know. I'm happy to incorporate and maybe each week try and come up with one of the examples that I've encountered where AI is helping people win, because it can. It absolutely can. And I want to shine a light on that as much as I want to prepare people for the real risks that are out there, to help people not get sucked out with the tides and not get dragged to the bottom of the ocean, because we don't have to. That's the thing. We don't have to. But I understand it can feel overwhelming, and it's a lot to do when you feel like you're having to do that all on your own. So hopefully you find this work helpful to you as you navigate it. Thank you so much to everybody for watching, for listening, and all that good stuff. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week and a great weekend. And as always, we will see you on the other side.